I'm here to talk to you about cyber mercenaries, not as an InfoSec professional, but as a hacker. I've been a cyber mercenary for 20 plus years. I've been doing it all my life. Get paid by foreign governments and foreign companies to do certain exercises. I thought it'd be beneficial to show you how we operate, just so you get an idea of the mindset behind what goes on in our world. So this is not a talk about APT groups. If you know about APT groups, Advanced Persistent Threat, I'm not talking about APT groups like 40 China or 37 North Korea. This is from a cyber mercenary point of view. Touched on earlier, this is a little bit what I did at DEF CON on the slide there, where I found a vulnerability in the death and registration system and birth registration system. The government at the time were trying to make it easier to register deaths because deaths and births were not being registered for whatever reason. So the government made it easier to register births and deaths to make sure mothers registered their babies, as well as also deaths were recorded. They moved that to an online system. In the US it's called EDRS, and there's vulnerabilities in that where a hacker such as myself could actually impersonate a doctor and a funeral director and then kill somebody off, and also do it in reverse and actually birth somebody. So you could actually birth somebody, kill them off, and then take their life insurance. I wrote a book on that called The Baby Harvest. So it actually goes through that step by step. But because you're dealing with hackers, they pirated that book and put that on Pirate Bay, so you don't actually have to buy it.
Imagine finding your credit cards canceled, your medical benefits discontinued, and your driver's license invalid.
All because the government declared you dead. We have discovered that a flaw in the online death registration system could allow someone to kill you online and wreak havoc on your life. Here's Tammy Leitner.
In order to show you just how big the problem is, we set out to have me killed. And all it took was a savvy security researcher on the other side of the world, armed with a computer.
He's a modern-day assassin.
Could you kill me?
Yes, I could.
How long would it take?
I could do it in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Is it difficult?
Not difficult at all.
No weapons, no blood, no pain.
So you're officially dead, you don't even know.
Chris Rock is an Australian security researcher who discovered a weakness in the online death registration process that allows him to have someone who is alive declared dead.
To prove it, he had me killed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in 3 different states. I may look alive, but in the digital world, a malicious hacker has all the tools needed to have me legally declared dead.
It's not the guy, I don't know if you know the guy in the top corner, his name's Simon Mann. He's a traditional mercenary. Simon Mann is a UK specialist. He's from SAS, Special Air Service, been in the military for 10 plus years. He then left the military and became a traditional mercenary. He was involved in coups in Sierra Leone, Angola and Equatorial Guinea. He's got some great stories. I teamed up with him because I was actually interested from the traditional mercenary sense versus cyber keyboard versus gun for hire, about what he had to offer, and he gave me some great insights on how he worked. For example, Simon was involved in, there's a country just north of Australia called Papua New Guinea. There's a big copper mine there called Bougainville, and some rebels had actually taken captive that island with the copper, and he was offered $18 million to take that mine back. It was $9 million up front and $9 million on delivery. He found out that that actual mine was on the ASX, on the Australian Stock Exchange, and he invested that $9 million into the Australian Stock Exchange, and he was then going to take over that mine with his group. He founded a company called Sandline and Executive Outcome. The Australian government actually caught on to what he was doing with the share transaction and stopped it, but that's the sort of mindset a traditional mercenary would have. So I teamed up with Simon just to get some ideas on how he operated. He actually went to jail in 2004, so that's the bad side of the industry. He was doing a coup in Equatorial Guinea and he actually got caught in Zimbabwe on the way over. I did a talk through the introduction on how to overthrow a government. I've actually got a video that I want to show you on this talk. This was done before the Trump-Russia scandal. It was in 2011 in the Arab Spring. I wanted to show you this video because it highlights just the amount of targets will attack around the actual victim itself to get what we want. So if you've got a target in the middle, we will target everything around it first, which may affect your industry. You may wonder why someone got hacked but nothing was taken, because we'll use it as a stepping stone to do what we're after. So I'll just show you this video on what this overthrow government was all about.
Hundreds of protesters outside Kuwait's parliament chant, "The people want to bring down the Prime Minister." They are demanding the removal of Prime Minister Sheikh Nasser al-Mohammed al-Sabah, whom they accuse of corruption.
As demonstrators break through gates and enter the main chamber, police reportedly beat up protesters who were marching towards the Prime Minister's residence demanding he resign. A member of the ruling family, Sheikh Nasser Mohammed al-Ahmad al-Sabah, is accused of failing to stem endemic corruption in Kuwait.
So the reason I showed you that video is just to give you an idea what a mercenary will do and what targets they will compromise, as I said before the video, on how extreme they'll get to get what they need done. So I was prompted to do this talk after I saw a couple of news articles come out in the Washington Post and the New York Times about the new age of cyber warfare. Now this has been going on for 20 plus years that I've been involved in it, and the journalists got some things right, but I thought it'd be a good opportunity to actually show you what's really going on in the real world. An area that's important for a lot of the people in this room is cyber insurance and act of war. I won't go into too much detail because I don't know your industry. I know there's some talks on that this afternoon. There was a mention before in the introduction about cyber warfare, but we're starting to see some lawsuits come out about insurance companies not paying out on something called an act of war. Obviously, in a nuclear bomb situation, it's quite easy. Targets are destroyed. We're not going to build a whole city based on insurance policies. As I said, I'm not going to go into the insurance. That's your area. But I just wanted to talk to you about, as a cyber mercenary, we will actually plant flags of other countries to make it look like it was somebody else than us. So if we're compromising targets around the world and we see a hacking group like an APT 40 or 37, for example, we'll actually pinch their code to cut, copy, paste and throw it on our targets to make it look like something else, just to take the real motive on what was going on, whether it be something to do with a bank. So just be aware, especially for the forensics guys and insurance, that there's people like myself that'll actually make it difficult for you. By maybe planting a flag, maybe an APT flag, they might format the drive and then deliberately only do a one format pass so that when you do the forensics and you recover the information, you'll see a flag and you'll think it's from that country. Just be aware of that. So for a white hat hacker like myself, there's a lot of peers out there like myself that are white hat hackers. Like Simon Mann, when he went to the military and then went to mercenary, a lot of white hackers are moving from white hat hackers to mercenaries for two reasons. First is money, but it's also it's quite fun, the work. So you actually get to not just produce a report for your customer at the end of the day, you actually get to sharpen your skills and actually do a real job from the other side. They're probably the most dangerous people out there. We're not talking, as I said, I keep mentioning the word APT group, but someone who's been in the industry for 25 years in the corporate sector, probably the most dangerous people. They've done forensics, anti-forensics, computer hacking. They know how corporate structures work, so they're not going to send dodgy phishing emails that just look stupid. I mean, you guys experience those all the time. There'll actually be some some thought and some process and some org structure thought out before they're going to do something. So a lot of these people are actually born to hack. Now, a common trait amongst cyber mercenaries, or you probably would have seen it yourself in your profession, is you see, even myself with the black backpack, it's quite common to see an InfoSec guy with a backpack. They may be on the spectrum, like on autism on spectrum. You might find that socially they're a little bit what we call constrained, but these are the most dangerous for social engineering because they don't know how to feel the same cues that, I'll say, you and I in this scenario would feel, so they actually have to mirror emotions. This is why they become really good at social engineering, because they start mirroring the emotions of their victim, and they can really understand based on the cues fed back to them. I know there's a social talk this afternoon, or might have been this morning. I won't go into too much of that, but you'll find a lot of the white hats will do both mercenary and white hat, and they're really good at social engineering. For myself, when I discovered social engineering by accident when my dad wanted me to take a car down to get some brakes fixed on the car. I knew where it was, I'd actually seen it, so I rang the place and said I'd like to book my car in to get the brakes fixed. Took the car down, and then I took it in, and the guy behind the counter said, "You haven't booked the car in," and because in my head I'd booked the car in, I convinced him that I had booked it in. When I rang him up at 12 o'clock to pick up the car, he said, "You hadn't even dropped the car off." At that moment I realised I'd rung the wrong place to book the car in, but I was so convinced that it must be true that I convinced him that it was true. So that was my first involvement in social engineering. So, does anyone know this guy? Marcus Hutchins. He's 25 years old. He's just about to be sentenced to go to jail. He was the one that stopped WannaCry by registering a domain. He was a hacker before he was a white hat hacker. He got caught selling a Trojan, a Kronos Trojan, about 2 years ago. And he set up a GoFundMe page for hackers to donate for his law case. Unfortunately, hackers being hackers, they use stolen credit cards to donate to the GoFundMe campaign. He raised $145,000 in a week, but they had to return all the money. It's a sense of humour, right? So how does someone become a cyber mercenary? How do they make that hop? Not this way. So I got some idiot on LinkedIn contacted me, wanted me to overthrow a government in Ireland. Probably not the best way to communicate that you want to overthrow a government, via LinkedIn. You usually find out from a friend of a friend. Someone will know, look, this guy's a good hacker, will he be interested in doing it? Now, a lot of people will deny this in this room, which is fine, but I can tell you now that if I rang 9 out of 10 white hat hackers and asked them to do a job with me, they would do it in a heartbeat, and that's happened in the past. Okay, the following I'm about to tell you is based on a true story. Some stuff I've obviously left out so I don't go to jail myself. Some identities have been changed, but I'll just give you an idea of how I got into the industry. So my wife's Turkish, and her father was ill, and the father had to go under a medical procedure, and they actually asked me whether I would actually help them assist with the operation. And because being married, I had no choice whether I wanted to or not. I think it was about $5,500. So I paid for the operation for her father. Now, I don't know what you call it in the US, but we call it an interest-free loan when you're dealing with family. Not only is it interest-free as you're not going to get any interest off that money, but the family member has no interest in paying that loan back. So I agreed to do that deal. Now, he was a nice guy, and in return he actually gave me a piece of land. This land was probably about I'm trying to convert it for metric, but maybe a 50-foot square area in Istanbul, maybe about 10 miles out. And look, it was a nice gesture. I've got no interest in land in Istanbul, but I took it. It was a thank you, and he gave it to me. Now, at the time, I had no idea what that land was worth, but about 10 years after he gave me that land, he'd actually passed away at that stage. I got a call from a Turkish developer that they wanted to buy that land for about $400,000. So it was a good deal. So I flew over to Turkey to do this deal, and at that time I then got a phone call from someone in the Middle East who said, "I've got a friend of a friend who would like you to do something for me." And that's how I got the introduction into the cyber merc business. This friend of a friend, I'll just call him Mike. Mike came to Turkey to meet me in Istanbul and said, "I work for a foreign government and they want you to do a job. They suspect that one of their employees has taken money from the company, or they know they've taken money from the company, but they need evidence of it. So they've moved money from the company and from the government and IP from the government into a secondary company. They set up an offshoot company, and they were taking investment dollars for that subsidiary to sell the government IP. So they wanted me to investigate that by cyber means. The deal was $250K up front and $250K on delivery, and the handler Mike would get a 20% cut. So that's how it came about. He was a little bit sheepish in asking me on how I would react, but that's how it started. Obviously, from my accent, I'm Australian. We're all convicts from Australia, so I'll use that as an excuse. So we agreed to do the job. We got obviously, I'll just call the guy Bob. So we got the contact's name, suspected email accounts, and how he was operating. So we got as much intel as we could get, and we said it would probably take about 4 to 6 weeks based on what we could find out about this guy and what he was up to. Now, this is how we look at a target, and this is why I showed you that video at the start. Is when we look at a target. So we've got Bob in the middle there, Bob or Alice. We look at a target and we want to own their life. We want to know exactly what's going on in their life. We want to know their family members so we can send emails from those family members. We want to know their doctors, their lawyers, where they bank, everything. So we compromise everything around that target, not just the target itself. That way we have an idea of what happens in that person's life. I mean, we get really intimate with these people. We know what porn they watch, everything about them. So how do we approach a target like this? We've got a lot of moving parts here. How do we do it? Well, you guys have probably seen exploits with Adobe PDF. You open up a PDF and it compromises your machine. For those who haven't, Adobe is like the crappiest product ever for security. It's been like that forever. Sorry if there's any Adobe vendors in here, but it's complete garbage. You can open up a PDF, open it up and look, oh yeah, it's a PDF. Everyone does it. It's safe, it's PDF, but then we're running code on the back. Sometimes we'll use that exploit. I think we've used that one for about 15 years. Every time they fix it, we just make a little change and then continue on. So best thing to use an iPhone with a PDF is you've got half a chance. Other targets, though, we wouldn't use the traditional phishing methods. We had to get a little bit more creative. So, for example, with the doctor, when we wanted to compromise the doctor to get his health records, we found out the doctor was moving house, so we pretended we were from a courier company, and we sent him an application where he could actually track the truck moving between destination A and B, but behind the scenes it was actually a Trojan. So we could actually find out, we could actually hack into the doctor and find out the health records of Bob. It's funny, there was a incident where Blackmores, which is a vitamin product in Australia, was getting ripped off, and they actually went to investigate these fake products, and the only reason they could actually tell that these vitamins were fake was the packaging was too good. As in, the Blackmore CEO said, the packaging was so good we couldn't even compete with that. It's the only reason they could tell the difference. The same when we craft a exploit, will make it appear exactly from the company itself. We may even have to hack into that moving companies just to get their letterheads and information like that. So there's always one hop leads to another hop so we can get our information. Other targets, we did USB sticks, not USB sticks on the ground, that's amateur hour stuff, but what we did is we'd actually, like for example in America with AT&T, like DirecTV and all that sort of stuff, we'd actually send a package DirecTV 6-month trial so you could actually watch TV. We would send a package like it was from AT&T, and the user would insert that USB stick. They could watch DirecTV, we'd actually get a real account for them, but at that time we would then run Trojans on their back machine. We found out that, the client told us that there were some investors involved, so we wanted to find out what was happening with these investors. And we found out these investors worked out of a shared office. Now shared offices for us are like gold, because we can walk into a shared office as a guest or visiting somebody else and we can actually look at the environment. I know shared offices are great for companies because they're cheap, but there's some disadvantage with them as well. So we found out that this VC firm had a shared office. There was 4 suites with a central area, and we wanted to get access to their Wi-Fi network and then jump on their network from there. So we went in with a device. Now everyone uses Raspberry Pis, and Raspberry Pis are really cool and they're really cheap, but at the time we didn't have Raspberry Pis. This was before the Pi days. So we had to create our own computer, something that would be the size of this, for example, that we could plant, hack into the Wi-Fi, grab all the details from the VC, bank accounts, emails, all that sort of stuff, and get out. Now, obviously, we can't sit in the shared office forever, so we need to leave something like this somewhere discreet. When we go into a job, we normally bring battery packs, like lithium battery packs, so we'll actually attach them to the device. That'll give us like 48 hours of power. That's usually enough to get what we need to do. We'll usually hop from this device, then jump into the environment. We'll install an exploit, and then it will then phone home. We call it ET because it always phones home. But we're lucky in this situation, being the shared office, we could actually hide the device behind a microwave, so we had power. So pulled the microwave forward, put the device behind the microwave, and then it would. Then we could then monitor the Wi-Fi across all the shared office space. One target we had difficulty with, so we had a wealthy, I'll just say Kuwaiti, that we couldn't get access to. He was very wealthy and he had security, and we couldn't get close enough to the premise. He had armed guards, and we couldn't get anywhere close to it. It was one of those situations where sitting in a car outside is not going to work. We found out from correspondence with the investment firms that he actually had a property on the beach, so that was perfect for us. So he had a holiday house. Now, when I'm talking about a holiday house, I'm talking about a floor this size times 3. That's a Q80 holiday house. Being on the water, we had the chance of attacking it by water, so we used this same device with lithium battery packs, waterproof obviously, and we just canoed past his property. Now, we couldn't sit there for 48 hours, so we just got one of those life preservers from a kid that, that when you're teaching kids how to swim around their arms, and we'd attach that device, wrap it in bubble wrap, and we'd just put it on the beach at low tide, knowing that we'd have 12 hours before high tide, and then it would wash the device away. That was enough time for us to jump on from that Wi-Fi device to the Q80's house, and then we could then put a Trojan on somewhere in that machine, in that house, and then we would get access. Now, some corporates we may not put it on a machine, we may put it on a printer. So in some cases we won't actually install Trojans, we'll actually change the firmware on a printer. Printers these days are essentially Linux boxes, so we'll actually put all our stuff on printers because there's no AV, antivirus on printers, so it's a perfect spot for us to hide, and then we can just monitor the environment. So after we had pretty much owned this guy's life, we knew what he was up to. Even for us, because we'd been doing it for about 4 or 6 weeks, we didn't understand, but the client knew exactly what was going on. They knew what they were looking for, and you guys as investigators will see this all the time. You collect the data, you look for keywords, you give it to the client, and they go from there. In this case, the client had exactly what they wanted. What they suspected was true. Money was being moved into private bank accounts and then to another company account, and he was pretty much dead to rights at that stage. So we had one problem. We didn't have any records of bank accounts. So we had personal bank accounts from Bob, but we didn't have his offshoot company or the transactions going to that. So we had to just think out of the box on how we were going to get those sort of records. We don't know why. We compromised his business, we compromised his home, but we didn't have access. At the time, we didn't know why. We found out later. So what we're asked to do at this stage is have a look at his bank records for 2 certain banks. Now, when a hacker attacks a bank, they've got 2 different ways to do it. The phishing exercise is obviously one of them, which is the most common, and they'll target the CFO. You guys would have seen that all the time. The other one is where a hacker will actually target core banking, so the core banking network of a bank, whether it be a tandem network, mainframe, whatever the bank's running at that stage. We needed to find out those transactions, and we didn't have records of those transactions. So the client asked us whether we could extend the contract and actually see if we could get those bank records. Now, for us to do that, we would have to hack into a bank, and in this case, 2 banks, which made it a little bit more harder. Now, when you're dealing with multiple banks as a hacker, the telco is the best way to hack into a bank, because you guys know with telcos, they pretty much look after the bank security, whether it's alerting, whether it's websites, whether it's upgrades to OSs. And this is just a local US services that that telcos will look after. So we knew that hacking the ISP, which is for hackers like the Holy Grail, we could pretty much control everything, including alerting. So when you're robbing a bank or trying to find out transactions in a bank, in this scenario, the first stop's always the hardest. So a lot of people in the room with network forensics looking for that IP address, where did they come from. What a hack will normally do is they'll use a Yagi or a directional antenna, maybe 3 or 4 kilometres, 2 mile away from there, from the first hop. When I mean first hop is first IP address. So they might actually target a hotel like the Marriott. So they might look at a spot on a hill, connect to the Marriott, and then use that as the first IP out, just so that nothing tracks back to them. Now, this is where civil war is your friend for the second, third, fourth, and final hop. What we'll do is we'll compromise hosts in these countries here. Perfect example of very hard to get warrants and information from countries at war. So we'll actually bounce our IP addresses off these targets here. We might look at a hotel in Pakistan, an Airbnb, an open Wi-Fi point, a McDonald's, whatever. But we'll always bounce our activity around. So you guys know this with forensics, but just watch that sort of activity where there's 13 or 14 hops between your target. Just because something is coming from China doesn't mean it's a Chinese attack. That's what we want you to think. So the beauty of hacking the ISP is we can actually replace the splash screens for internet banking. So obviously this wasn't the bank that we hacked or ISP, but once you have that secure lock and it says citibank.com.au, the client's going to put their details in, no problems. So what would we do? By owning the ISP, you own the web server, you own the termination of the SSL. In English, when someone types in the username and password, we'll take a copy of that. Then we'll pass it through the SQL database. SQL database will return it back to the web server. Web server displays everything back to the customer and none the wiser. But we have a log file of all the users and passwords that go through. The beauty of that is too, we can also capture 2FA tokens. So if it's time sensitive, we can actually capture the token and then log on using those credentials. So in this case, when we looked, it took us a week for the first bank and a month for the second bank to get these details for the client. So it took us a week to actually capture that client's Bob logging on to that bank account, so we could actually then log on as Bob and get those details. We don't know why the delay in checking bank accounts, maybe it was not used, but the government were right, he was transferring those funds into his own account. The government obviously couldn't use that evidence in law, but they had enough then gusto to then go with warrants for all the other stuff and then capture these details legally down the track. In this case, the bank wasn't robbed, but if you were going to rob a bank, and I said based on a true story, that hackers can't do it by themselves. They can transfer money out, but it's very difficult to then get that money out. You'll see a lot of your clients where money will get transferred to Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong takes about 6 weeks to do anything, and then money gets taken out, and then the guys are on the run. But they're on CCTV. But there's actually groups out there, I'll just call it the Jewish syndicate, so it's like the mafia but for Jewish, where they'll actually make transactions disappear. So you guys may be aware of this, but there's groups out there that if you do a bank job and you need to transfer money, they'll actually make the transaction disappear. So if you transfer it to a certain bank, they'll make the to and from go away, and then that money gets laundered over the next 6 to 9 months between different banks. Okay, at this stage now, the government have everything they need, and then Bob gets arrested and he goes to jail. Just a conclusion to that story. Bob got out on parole. What had happened was, when we'd hacked into his doctor's office, we found out that he had a heart condition. Obviously, his lawyer knew that already as well. We'd mentioned that to the client, and the client ignored that, but the lawyer used that heart condition to get him out on parole. So he actually got out of jail on this case. And being Bob, a pretty savvy guy, committing these sort of crimes in the Middle East, he actually absconded from the Middle East really quickly. He had a dual UK passport. I'll leave that story for another day, but put it this way, he was in a fishing boat, he wore a burqa, crossed borders, and then flew out back to the UK where he was safe. So in conclusion, I hope I haven't scared you too much, but just beware of the mercenary that's here just to cause trouble in your industry, and I apologise for that. That's all, everybody. Thank you so much.